She only wanted to admire the necklace, just for a moment. A simple woman, dressed modestly, with kind eyes and quiet grace, stood in the middle of a luxury boutique, mesmerized by the sparkle of a $12 million diamond piece. It wasn't hers, and she never claimed it to be. But in the eyes of the staff, she didn't belong there. Within minutes, whispers turned into accusations. Security was called, cameras rolled, and just like that, she was labeled a thief. People stared, some judged. Others pulled out their phones, ready to record another scandal they didn't understand. No one cared to ask who she was, or why she was there. All they saw was a woman out of place in a world that runs on wealth and appearances. The necklace was swiftly taken from her hands. Her voice, soft and trembling, was no match for the assumptions in the room. But just as they were about to escort her out, the doors swung open, and in walked a man who instantly changed everything. Tailored suit, calm stride, eyes that didn't flinch. With one look, he silenced the room. And then, without hesitation, he did the unthinkable. He bought the necklace, right then and there, in cash. What no one realized was that the woman they had just accused was his wife. But the story doesn't end there, because behind that one act of love and power lies a deeper truth, one about class, judgment, and the quiet strength of a woman who had once been invisible to the world until she wasn't. So, who was she really? And what made this billionaire husband risk it all to make a point that day? You're about to find out. Her name was Elena. She didn't grow up around diamonds or designer brands. She came from a small town, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. Elena's world had always been built on kindness, hard work, and humility. Luxury stores and million-dollar price tags were never part of her life until she met Daniel. Daniel wasn't just a billionaire. He was the kind of man people whispered about in boardrooms and headlines. Private jets, global investments, a name that carried weight. But to Elena, he was just the man who once helped her fix a flat tire on a rainy night. Their love wasn't flashy. It wasn't built on money. It was quiet, real, and raw. So when they married, most people didn't understand. Some called her lucky. Others called her a gold digger. She ignored the noise. On the day of the incident, Daniel was running late. Elena, hoping to surprise him with a simple gift, walked into that boutique alone. She had no intention of buying the necklace. She just wanted to see it up close, because it reminded her of her late mother's locket. But the staff didn't see a woman lost in a memory. They saw someone who didn't belong. Their tongues shifted, their glances grew sharper. One even whispered under her breath. Still, Elena stayed calm. She had learned to carry herself with grace, no matter how cruel the world could be. But when the manager accused her of trying to steal, she froze. It wasn't the insult that hurt, it was how easy it was for them to believe it. And just when it seemed like no one would come to her defense, the door opened. Daniel walked in, and in that moment, everything changed, but not in the way anyone expected. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He looked around the boutique, at the stunned staff, the frozen customers, the silent security guards. Then his eyes met Elena's, and for a brief moment, the chaos faded. She wasn't crying, but her eyes said everything. The betrayal, the embarrassment, the pain of being judged for simply existing in the wrong place, wearing the wrong clothes. Without saying a word, Daniel walked straight to the counter, asked for the necklace, and placed a black card on the glass. But the manager hesitated. "This piece is valued at $12 million, he reminded, trying to reclaim control. Daniel didn't flinch. "Then charge 13, he said, "and apologize to my wife." The transaction went through, the receipt printed, but the apology never came. Not really. There was a forced sorry, muttered with lowered eyes, but the damage was done. Elena stood still, unsure of what hurt more, the accusation or the hollow regret that followed it. That night, the story spread like wildfire. A billionaire defending his wife, a simple woman mistaken for a thief. But what the headlines missed was the deeper truth. This wasn't just about a necklace. It was about something bigger. How quickly the world decides who matters and who doesn't, and how money can silence a room, but not always change hearts. Behind the scenes, people started digging. Who was Elena? Where did she come from? Why had no one heard of her before? Some whispered she was hiding something. Others suggested the marriage wasn't real. Even within Daniel's inner circle, trust began to crack. Investors questioned his judgment. Business partners raised eyebrows. All because of one moment, one woman, and one choice that no one could understand. But the real story was only just beginning. As the days passed, the spotlight grew hotter. News outlets replayed the footage over and over. Elena standing alone, accused, humiliated, and then suddenly saved by a billionaire husband with no hesitation. The public couldn't look away. Some praised Daniel as a hero, but others weren't convinced. Online threads exploded with theories. Was it a publicity stunt? Was Elena really who she claimed to be? Every detail of her life was picked apart. Old photos surfaced. An ex-colleague hinted she'd once worked at a diner. A former neighbor claimed she'd always aimed too high. The press twisted her kindness into mystery, her silence into suspicion. Daniel tried to shield her, but even he couldn't stop the noise. He pulled out of 2 major business deals. Clients backed away quietly. One shareholder even questioned if Elena was a risk to his reputation. At home, Elena barely spoke. She had always stayed out of the spotlight, content in the quiet life they had built. But now every step she took was watched, every word analyzed. She started receiving anonymous letters, some supportive, others cruel. One simply read, "Asterisk, you'll never be one of them, asterisk." And then came the leak. A private document, one Daniel never meant to be made public, detailing a trust fund set up in Elena's name, worth millions. Suddenly, the whispers turned into accusations. Asterisk, did she marry for money? Did she plan this from the start, asterisk? Even Daniel seemed shaken, not because he doubted her, but because the world was trying to turn them against each other. The pressure mounted. The line between love and damage control blurred. And when a secret from Elena's past resurfaced, something not even Daniel knew, everything they thought they had built started to crack. Because some stories don't fall apart in one moment. They unravel piece by piece, until the truth can't be hidden anymore. The breaking point came during a live charity gala, one of the most anticipated events of the year. Daniel had planned to stay low-key, but Elena insisted they attend. "We can't hide forever," she told him. But as soon as they stepped onto the red carpet, the questions flew like arrows. Flashing cameras, voices yelling over each other. One reporter asked if Daniel regretted marrying her. He didn't answer. He just looked at Elena, and for a split second, even she couldn't tell what he was thinking. Inside the ballroom, the tension followed them like a shadow. Elena walked gracefully, but her heart pounded. She knew the night would bring everything to the surface. Halfway through the evening, the host unexpectedly invited her on stage. It was meant to be a kind gesture, but it turned into a test. As she took the microphone, the room fell into a hush. Then she spoke. She told the room exactly who she was, about the town she came from, about her mother, who taught her that dignity isn't something you wear, it's something you carry. She admitted the trust fund was real, but she never touched it. Not a single cent. She had her own savings, her own work. And as for the secret, she revealed it. Years ago, she had been arrested, wrongfully, for defending a co-worker from an abusive manager. Charges dropped, records sealed, but still she'd carried the shame. Not because she was guilty, but because the world had taught her to feel small. The room was silent. And then someone clapped, followed by another, then another. But just as things seemed to settle, Daniel stood and took the mic. With a quiet smile, he looked at Elena and said, "There's something you didn't know either." He paused. That necklace wasn't worth 12 million. The crowd gasped. It was a replica, a decoy piece. The real one was sold 3 weeks earlier. He turned to the boutique owner seated nearby. "Tell them." The owner, pale and nervous, nodded. And just like that, the story turned again. Not about a simple woman with a billionaire husband, but about a world obsessed with status, fooled by glitter, and completely unprepared for a woman who never needed saving. The truth unraveled faster than anyone expected. The boutique had planted the replica for display, hoping it would create buzz and draw elite buyers. But when Elena picked it up, they didn't see a curious woman, they saw someone to blame. And when the real story came out, their silence became their undoing. Within days, the store faced backlash, losing investors and public trust. The staff involved were dismissed quietly, but the damage had already been done. For Elena and Daniel, the storm slowly began to clear. Public opinion shifted. What once looked like scandal now seemed like strength. Elena, once misunderstood and judged, became a quiet symbol of resilience, someone who never asked for fame, but handled it with dignity when it came. Offers poured in, interviews, brand deals, speaking engagements, but she turned down most of them. She didn't need a stage to prove her worth. Daniel, too, changed. He stepped back from the corporate spotlight, focusing more on foundations and causes Elena cared about: education, women's safety, small-town development. Not for PR, but because he realized something the night of the gala. Love isn't measured in headlines or high society's approval. It's in trust, and in knowing someone will stand beside you, even when the world wants to tear you apart. And that necklace, they had it framed, not for its value, but as a reminder that sometimes what sparkles isn't real, and what's real doesn't need to sparkle. So, the woman once mistaken for a thief didn't just prove them wrong, she taught them something they weren't ready to learn: about grace, about loyalty, and about how the quietest people can carry the loudest truths. Because in the end, Elena wasn't just Daniel's wife. She was a story they never saw coming.